Hey guys, welcome back to another week. What if you could treat complex neurological cases by day and be swimming with manta rays beneath the ocean by night? So today's guest has done a lot of really cool things that I think is important for us to step back and remember that regardless of how dedicated we are from a healthcare perspective, doing other things that make you have a fulfilled life, I think is one of the most important lessons that I think we can have. So Dr. Andrew Wilner is a board-certified neurologist, author of the Locum Life, host of the Art of Medicine podcast. He's an avid scuba diver, has built a career that blends this clinical world with personal freedom. And he's proof that medicine doesn't have to be all-consuming, right? That you can create the space for creativity and curiosity and passion really beyond the hospital. So with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Wilner. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Heather. Your premise that medicine doesn't have to be all-consuming, I don't know, I might be wrong because before we get started, I want to say that medicine is all-consuming. And through a lot of my career, really, that's all I did and put a lot of other things on hold. And I think my approach has sort of been to be 100% here and then take a break and then 100% there and then go back. But I did 2 residencies. I'm board certified in internal medicine and neurology, and I did a fellowship in epilepsy. So 7 postgraduate years. And in the middle of that, I did a year of ER in a freestanding emergency room. And that's sort of an important part of the story. So now I'm married for the last 10 years, and I have a 6-year-old child. And I have a full-time job, and I'm a professor of neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, Tennessee. So that's one sort of way of looking at my life. I have a full-time conventional job and a somewhat unconventional family, but, he goes to school and my wife is home and, we do all the sort of usual things. But when I was single, I had a lot more sort of freedom to travel here and travel there. And of course, I was in Tonga in September, just this past September, swimming with the whales. So travel doesn't have to go away, but it does have to be planned. And there should be some cool whale videos surfacing pretty soon, as soon as I get a chance to edit them. Locum Tenens was one way. In fact, when I worked emergency room, I had done my medical internship at the Long Beach Veterans Hospital after medical school in internal medicine, which at that time was sort of my goal to become an internist. The smart doctors that I knew were all internists. We're going way back when. I grew up, in the 60s, right? And not everybody did a fellowship. In fact, in those days, not everybody did a residency. There were doctors who did an internship and they went into practice. Just doing a full residency was like a big deal, and becoming a specialist in internal medicine. And every now and then somebody would do like a cardiology fellowship or something, or endocrinology, but that was not sort of what everybody did. And so to me, becoming an internist was the way to become a diagnostician and a clinician, which seemed to me the really cool parts of medicine, figuring things out. So I started my internal medicine at the Long Beach Veterans Hospital, and I did a month rotation in everything, did renal, GI, ICU, you do everything. And it was all very interesting, of course, all very hard. But by the end of the month, you kind of had a good feel. How do I work up, hepatitis? How do I work up GI bleed? How do I work up renal failure? You kind of felt comfortable, and it was very demanding. I remember I started, I guess, July 1, and my first day that I did not go to the hospital was Christmas Day. So we rounded 7 days a week, and we were on call every 4th night. And that's what you did. And so I had made a deal with myself at that time because I had a book I wanted to write in my head. And I said, you know what? No writing during your internship. It's too demanding and you don't want to do a suboptimal job as an intern. So we're just going to put the book aside. You're going to do your internship and then we'll see what happens. So I did my internship. And it was great. But the problem was I didn't know where to go from there. It was like, this is a lot of work and it's all interesting, but what am I going to do with all of this? I didn't know. So I talked to my program advisor and I said, I'd like to take a break want to take a year off, write my book, and come back. In those days, there was no such thing as a gap year. It was a fairly unconventional thing to do.
I still think it's frowned upon now. I mean,
Oh, yes.
I remember having a baby in residency and just asking for like a month off to have a baby. It was not easy to do and stay in line with finishing on time. Now, they were able to make some creative arrangements, but anyway, okay. So did they let you take a year?
It's interesting that you say that because I just interviewed a woman for my podcast, The Art of Medicine, Carolyn Larkin Taylor, who is now almost retired as a neurologist. She was one of the first women neurologists. And when she was in medical school, she had a baby. And we were discussing how that was like totally unheard of. And she got no support whatsoever and just kind of had to, deal with it.
And my generation, I think, had it obviously better, right? I had a female neuropathologist actually who was like, I will make it so that you can have at least more time at home with your baby. And so she gave me a research elective, but it enabled me. I'd have to go in and I'd bring the baby with me. So I'd have to say my generation hasn't had it much better. And I'm sure for future generations, even better. But getting the actual time where you could completely be unconnected was not possible. You had to take, vacation and stay on track. But again, it's come a lot better in these last
and I
years.
think I should say, because I've done a lot of diverse things, that I'm probably not a good role model for a lot of doctors. In other words, if you have a goal, like I want to be chief of neurology at Mass General, then you shouldn't do what I did. I was recently promoted to professor, and that's because I've really been an academic. Even when I did Locum Tenens, I was writing papers and an editor of, editing journals and helped edit a textbook. And I was always very, very involved in ways that were uncompensated and took a lot of time. But because I had that interest, I would say it's very, very difficult to work your way up through the academic ranks, which still have kind of a very clear, it's like the military. If you want to be a general, there are things you got to do. And if you want to move up in the academic world, there are things you have to do. Now, I would say there's a little more leeway these days. I know one.
Now, so you went, just to get back to did they let you take the year off to write the book?
Right. So it's an interesting story, actually. So I talked to my advisor, who I barely knew, and he said, yeah, he goes, that's okay. He says, don't worry about it. So I wrote my book, and in order to support myself, I had to do something. So I worked moonlighting at Bellwood General Hospital in Bellflower. And it was this 99-bed hospital that I think no longer exists that had an emergency room with 2 cots. So I did 3 12-hour shifts a week. So overnight shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And often I could sleep for a few hours in the middle of the night. But I was woefully untrained for this because I had done my VA internship at the VA. So I had pregnant women coming in. I was delivering babies. I was suturing. I was taking foreign bodies out of eyes, setting broken bones, treating dog bites, things that I had never done in my internship.
You figured it out, though.
I had a book. I had a satchel, literally, with all the Washington manuals for orthopedics, ophthalmology, and I used the phone very liberally. I would ask each patient when they came in, one lady comes in, her total body rash, right? It's like, well, It's like, do you have a doctor? So, oh yeah, I see Dr. So-and-so. So in those days, a lot of people actually had family doctors. So I would say, hey, this is Dr. Wilner. I'm in the ER. I got your patient here and she's got this rash all over her body. What do you think I ought to do? But by the end of the year, I had a pretty good clue, how to manage all these various problems. So I learned a lot. And I also got my book done. But here's the risk of when you do unconventional things. And so I went back to my advisor and say, well, I'm ready to, pick up as a PGY. And he said, oh, that's not going to work out. I said, what do you mean that's not going to work out? He goes, well, this year, all of the interns decided to stay. The VA had a long history of interns dropping out for one reason or another. Some were just, did 1 year and then would go do something else, and some just didn't like it. And so there were always positions, I guess, in the second year. But this year, he said everybody wanted to stay. And I was kind of naive and innocent. And I was like, well, you told me I could come back. And the guy just, well, sorry. I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? So I'm from the East Coast and I had, gone to Long Beach. I had no support system whatsoever. I mean, I was just supporting myself. So I wrote to all of the local hospitals, and it turned out that Los Angeles County Hospital in LA has a huge program, like 100 medical interns and residents, and they have a huge dropout rate because at least in those days, it's one of the busiest hospitals in the country and very demanding. I mean, if you were an intern there, you just worked 24/7, and the residents covered 2 interns. And it was just a really hard, physically demanding program. Anyway, I found myself there for an interview because half their internship class had dropped out, so they needed PGY2s. And I was trying to impress the guy, Dr. Klotz. I remember it was Dr. Klotz. He
The
was
fact
the
that
program
you remember
director.
that.
Yep. And I was trying to impress him. I've written papers and I'm very interested in the humanities, only to discover he didn't care. All he wanted to know was that like I was a real person and wasn't a felon because
Just a
he had
heartbeat and you could
slots
show
to
up.
fill. If I was going to show up, then I was hired. So I did my next 2 years at LA County Hospital. And but the interesting thing about that is while I was in the ER treating everything known to man, I discovered that the patients that came in with neurologic complaints, they were dizzy, their eyes were crossed, their arm was numb, they couldn't walk, trouble, garbled speech. I thought this was fascinating. It's like, whoa. The brain is really interesting. And of course, I had seen some neuro cases here and there, but I had never done a neuro rotation. And I guess the patients I'd seen, were way past the diagnosis stage and not a lot of help there. It just didn't seem that interesting. But here, these people walking in with these strange problems, visual, weird things going on. It's like, whoa, this is interesting. So I had a friend, my resident, when I was in medical school, one of my residents who I admired had gone to do her pediatric neurology residency at McGill at the Montreal Neurologic Institute, which is a world famous place. Wilder Penfield, who made the homunculus map, he did that at McGill at the Montreal Neurologic Hospital. And they were always pioneers, particularly in epilepsy treatment. So I went to visit her for a weekend just because we were friends. And she said, Andrew, I love it here. These people are really smart. You ought to apply. So I said, okay. So I applied. In those days, there was no match for McGill. You just, filled out some form. And so I filled out the form. It's the most competitive program in North America. They take 1 American a year and the rest Canadian. So it seemed like a low risk thing to do. Like, why
See what
not?
happens.
Not a big deal. And I forgot about it. And a year later, I don't know, it was a busy day at LA County, and I got a phone call. And, I'll remember his name in a moment, but this is Dr. Jones from the Montreal Neurologic Institute. Want to let you know you've been accepted to our program. It's like, what? I thought it was a joke. I had forgotten that I'd applied. He goes, but we can't take you for 2 years. Like, yeah, whatever. Okay. And then it turned out it was a real thing. And so it gave me time to complete my internal medicine. Because I figured, well, worst case, I'll do a year in neurology. I'll know a little more neurology than your average internist, and then I can bail and everything's fine. I'll just be an internist who knows a little more neurology. That can't hurt. So, but then I started doing neurology and actually I did like it. So I stayed on for the whole thing and then did a fellowship. So all to say that my particular path not been a straight line.
Well, and when you think about it, okay, so you got out. When did you start your locums? How did you go from fellowship or training? Did you go straight to locums? Or if I remember, there was a step in between.
And what you did in those days, your choices were after you finished your training. And I had done the epilepsy fellowship because I just loved reading brainwaves. I thought that was cool. We had paper and you turned the page and these squiggly. I thought that was really neat. And then epilepsy is a big problem in the if you're a neurologist, you're going to see people with epilepsy. And it was actually a way to have a private practice to make it sustainable because 20 to 30% of your patients were going to have seizures. So it was a good thing to know about. And it also seemed that seizures were terribly managed in the community. It's like, gee, this isn't that hard, but people do not do it well. Looks easy to me. I'm going to do it. So for a lot of reasons, So then I joined. Your choices were you join a private practice group, you go into academics, or you go on the dark side, which is pharma. Those were really your three choices. I mean, locum tenens was for people who couldn't get a job, and it was certainly not a career. That was not on my horizon. So I joined this private practice group of 5 neurologists who all seemed to be upstanding guys. I'm going to be the one who can help, who can give the answer to this curious syndrome you have. I joined. Academics was not appealing to me. Many of the academic professors I had. Yeah, speaking as a professor of neurology.
I was about to say, congrats on your promotion.
Right. Which is very recent, right?
That's what I mean. That's
long
kind
time
of funny.
to get up through the ranks, and you'll see why in a moment. So I joined the practice and I liked it. And we started an epilepsy center that I became the director of. We did epilepsy surgery. I did drug trials. My practice was only people with epilepsy. I actually had thousands of them, or some people who thought they had epilepsy and didn't. That's kind of a thing. I became an expert in that. I always published a paper every year, even though my partners kind of frowned on it because it just took time away from my revenue generating function. So there was always some tension there, but it was something I always had students, even if we didn't have a medical school, I was in Charlotte, but I would have undergraduates with me. I'd have visiting people. I'd have pharma people shadow me around. But to me, medicine was much more interesting when you were learning and teaching than just kind of getting the job done, which when you're a private practice doctor, that's 90% of what you do is just trying to see as many as you can and getting done. With that concept always seemed to me very jarring. Neurology and fast do not go together.
No.
I mean, those words are just
There's
hard
a lot
to
you got to figure out with neurology.
Same sentence. If you want to do it right, it's very hard to do it quickly, certainly, and thoroughly, which that's just my personality, I guess. I like to be thorough. But then, after about 5 years of private practice and seeing epilepsy patients, I mean, medicine is always challenging and there's always new things. But I didn't see myself doing this forever. Academically, it was no longer interesting. And so I thought, I should be an academic. I should be in academics. I should have a fellow to help me read it, So I looked around. Finally, I found an academic job. And we won't spend too much time on it because it was a total catastrophe. And the terminology had not evolved yet, but it was a toxic work environment. And as I say, I didn't have those words at that time. So I quit. First time in my life I had ever quit anything. But I tried to fix it for a few months. I said, I can fix this. I can fix that. Then I realized that they didn't want it fixed. And I was too low on the totem pole, really, to fix anything. I was an assistant, or an associate professor, and it was a nightmare. So I left. I quit. It was like, well, now what? And so that was very interesting. My dad, who was always supportive and wonderful, whenever I'd get together with him, for lunch, he'd always say, "Oh, did they fire you yet?" And it was kind of like a running joke for years. And so we had one of our scheduled lunches, and I was like, "Hey, guess what, Dad? I quit." It was like, oh. And but he was, he was always supportive no matter what I did. He was just an amazing guy. So it was like, well, now what? So I thought, well, should I go back to Charlotte? I'd been there 8 years. I had a great practice. My patients didn't want me to go. My partners didn't want me to go. Nobody could really understand why I was really leaving, except me. And
Do you mind if I ask, how old were you when you had quit that private practice?
Yeah, so
I had a theory.
I would have been in my late 30s.
Late 30s. I do think there's this like mid-career, and I'll call it mid-career. And I know if you're a non-traditional applicant that may not be, mid-career may be different for other people. But I do think there is this mid-career, which I say is like 10 years, 5 to 10 years out, where you do hit this moment of, you look around, right? And you're like, is this it? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing for the rest of my life? Like, and you don't dislike the work necessarily. For me, that's when we started our business. For you, you went and explored this other realm in the university setting, and then you're like, oh, that's not going to work. And you tell me, feel free to disagree with me, but I do think that there's this like that period of time where you do get this urge to do something different?
Yeah, well, I'd always had that urge, actually, ever since, because I knew I was a writer long before I started medicine. I don't know if we have time, I'll tell you another story. So when I was like 12 or 13, I told my dad, I said, Dad, I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a writer. I mean, that's what worked for me. Pick up the pen, start writing. It all felt right. And so that was always there. And I was always trying to balance it. And medicine, I would read the greats, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and I loved them. And I was thinking, as I read it, I said, their books would be even better if they were doctors, if they understood people biologically, physiologically, psychologically, the way a physician does. The best way for me to become a writer is to become a doctor. That seemed perfectly obvious to me. So in my medical school interviews, that's what I said. Well, so 50 applications later, I did not get accepted to medical school because I guess I was ahead of my time. The idea, I was supposed to say I want to help people, and I didn't volunteer in a hospital, pushing people around and doing the things you do when you're in high school and college. Well, that seemed like a total waste of time to me. I mean, I had fantastic grades and all of the other stuff, but I didn't present myself the way the community expected. I was always fascinated by biology, and human biology seemed, the most complex. So it all made sense to me. So when I got all those, I still have them. They're in a box right there, 50 rejection letters. I didn't really know what to do. It was damaging to my self-esteem, to say the least. And I was at Yale at that time, an undergraduate. So I talked to my advisors and they said, well, if you want to do a PhD in, marine biology, we've got a slot for you. Because I had done some undergraduate work in that department because I liked it. It was fun. And it was like, well, that's a great offer. Except that's not what I want.
What you want to do?
And it's like, well, what am I going to do? Like deliver pizzas? I mean, college graduates are seeing that now. But I mean, when you graduate with a college degree, and it doesn't matter how great that college is, you're not necessarily trained to earn a living, right? So I was really quite adrift. And so I figured, well, I'll reapply. See what happens. But the word on the street was that once you'd been rejected, you're already in a separate pile.
Yeah.
That your chances...
Like you really want to go. So,
So I had a 2-year gap. To reapply was certainly no assurance that I would get accepted after 2 years. And when you're 22 years old, 2 years is a really long time. So it's like, well, now what? Back to pizzas again, and because there was no way around this. So what to do? So Dad, turns out that he had a buddy who had a son who had a similar scenario, but he was a pretty persistent guy. And he found a school in France that had something called the Committee for International Medical Exchange and applied to that school and was accepted to medical school and eventually transferred back to the US and continued his training. So Dad suggested that I try that. And I said, you're out of your mind. It's like, I'm going to go to medical school in French, my worst subject ever. It was the only thing I got like less than an A in was French when I was in high school. I said, that's insane. Well, long story short, that's what I did. I did well and I transferred and I completed my medical school at Brown and then ended up at Long Beach. So just to say that early on, it was clear to me things were not linear.
But it's funny though, but they weren't linear, but it was lots of moments where you were obviously given an opportunity to not go that path, right? And either way, you continued to forge on. So,
yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean? Like you knew what you wanted to do, even though you've kind of, in my opinion, I've had a somewhat non-traditional career. I do want to get to the locum tenens part. Because I do think that piece of your time, and for our listeners who may be struggling with what do I do in that mid-career section? Do I go and change my job? But I do think nowadays locum's such a big deal, right? Like it's everywhere. And so if you're at all unhappy or unsatisfied, like going and doing locums and then doing whatever else you want on the side outside of those hours is just there. And then that may not have been the reason why you chose to do locums. I do want to get to that.
Okay, so we're back now. I quit my job. I got nothing to do. I started working as a medical journalist because I've always been a writer. I used to go to conferences all the time. Somebody would walk up, hey, Dr. Wilner, tell me about your research. And they'd be writing these little articles. We used to have throwaway magazines in those days, but big format neurology reviews, CNS news. And, there were reporters. So I thought, well, I could do that. So I did that. And I did that for about 10 years. And it was fun. And then I thought, I ought to go back into practice, I ought to see patients again. And that's when I started doing locums. And I will say that you should, it's like a public service. You can't take time off like I did and expect to go back, because even then it was very strict. And I almost had to retire because 10 years without officially seeing patients was tough.
Yeah, you couldn't do that today. You could not do that today.
You can't go more than 2 years without a letter or a couple letters from colleagues who have seen you practice within the last 2 years and say you're good. And if you haven't practiced within the last 2 years, you can't get those letters and you can't get hired. Now, you can set up your own practice, on the corner, but you can't get hospital privileges. So that could be another whole episode, by the way.
Yeah.
And I discussed that in pretty good detail in my book, The Locum Life. So locums, it turned out, which was not a thing when I started doing it, and now it's kind of a thing.
A big thing.
Was a way to balance, because you only have to do what you're supposed to do. I want to work a week, a month, 6 months, and then you're done. And it was like, wow, this is great. I didn't know that existed. And doing locums, I actually did academic locums. I did Locum Tenens at the Mayo Clinic. I didn't know that existed. That was a blast. And so that kind of got me back into the academic world. I did a few academic locums, and here I am. My life has been a lot of that. So you're not really expected to go to meetings and build the system and do all of that. You're just expected to see patients and write your note and go home. And it's like, wow, what a concept. And so I found locums a way. Remember, I talked earlier, I like putting 100%, that I could go fly somewhere to Minnesota or South Dakota and put in my 100% for weeks or a few months, and then done. You never get an email. What about this patient? What about that patient? It's not your problem. Done. Then I could go to Southeast Asia, for 3 months and then come back when I run out of money. So in my book, I talk about locums for 3 categories. 1, you just finish your training. You don't know what you want to do. Go try it out. Try a big group, try a small group, try Hawaii, try Alaska. Whatever you want to do, you can try it, with no expectations that you're going to stay. And what does happen sometimes, I had 2 job offers, permanent offers, while I was doing locums. It's like, hey, Dr. Wilner, we kind of like having you around. You want to stay? We can hire you, put you on, make you full time. And I considered it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. The freedom of locums. Yeah. Now, it's also the freedom not to have a job, because there isn't always something available when you're available.
When my dad was practicing, was an OBGYN. Private practice was like the big thing, right? And then now that pendulum has swung the other direction, where you do have more corporate healthcare. And I'll be curious to see what that looks like in 10 years.
Let me say one thing, though, to the younger physicians who are watching or listening, is that all of this is noise. You're going to get employed here, you're going to get employed there, you're going to be self-employed, that's all noise. What you really want to focus on is being a good doctor. And that's all the stuff that you wanted to do before you even got into medical school. That's reading and studying and being compassionate and understanding what you're doing and being the best at what you can do. And that's actually the only thing that matters. Because regardless of what you do, you're going to get paid. Your core role is as a doctor, which is still, I think, the most important and valuable job out there. And that should not be diminished in any way. The rest of the stuff is going to sort itself out in the
next... But it always does, right? Just get paid what you get paid, spend less than you get paid, find some time to do something else you enjoy outside of work, because at the end of the day, you could work 40, 50 years. And if that's all you do, you're going to look back going, gosh. And there are people who enjoy that and they want to work, and that be their only thing. And there's no qualms about that. Me, I like to eat good food and spend time with my kids, my husband. And I think regardless of what you've done, whether it's been locums or been, the university world, you've always found a space to do the stuff.
Yes, I think that's important.
And I think you can get distracted with all the noise, right? With what the insurance companies are doing that we don't like, what universities are doing. Wherever you are sitting, you can always sit and complain, right? No matter where you are, no matter what year it is. But again, finding the things. And so I do want to ask, you've traveled, you've written your books. What would you say is the most enjoyable thing you've done outside of medicine to balance kind of the hard parts of medicine? What have you enjoyed the most?
I teach a course on the humanities in medicine now, which is something I've been interested in long before I was a doctor, which is writing, which is about people and how they respond to stressful life events, which we all experience, like death, whether we want to or not. And they affect us. And so in this humanities course, we explore writings and situations and how did that experience affect you? How could you help the patient? What are they experiencing? And of course, there's been a lot of short stories and writers who write about these things. And so we get to read them and comment on them. And I think the other thing that's really been fun for me is my podcast, because it's the same way. We take all of this experience I've had over, 50 years. And when I talk to someone and interview them, whether it's about healthcare policy or about the latest poem they write, I can bring a lot to that conversation because I have been there, done that. That's important. And so I think my podcast and my humanities course would be the top fun things that I'm doing now.
And so the name of the podcast, for those of you, I said it earlier, but is the Art of Medicine podcast. And so for listeners, go check it out. I've listened to many of his episodes, really find it just something enjoyable, something that's different. Please share your contact information or your website for the listeners.
Sure, very easy. It's andrewwilner.com. That's my website. That's the easiest way to find me. I almost always respond. I get some very interesting emails from all over the world, and I do my best to respond. And I'll add, one of the interesting characters that I did interview is this lady, Heather Signorelli. And that episode should be coming out in about a week. So check it out.
Okay, I like it. Well, thank you for being on today. I'm sure we could sit and chat for many different episodes just about medicine and life and all the things. And I think it's important to think through where you're at right now. Where do you want to be? Making sure that you're spending time doing the things you enjoy and being a good doctor at the same time. So thanks for listening and joining us this week. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Heather.